Clark with House News, and I'm excited to join you today. So I'm actually going to be talking about the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. August 29, 2005 is a day that I and many others will probably never forget. I mean, here we are 15 years later, post Katrina, and time flies by. And I wanted to do a live stream to take some time to just reflect on this day that forever changed so many lives, mine including, and my guest who's on with me today. And my special guest joining me is Taylor Harrison. And Taylor is based in New Orleans and is a community planner for a local nonprofit called Friends of Lafitte Greenway. And she also happens to be one of my best friends from high school. And I wanted Taylor to be with me for this live stream because when I think of New Orleans, I think of Taylor. She's vibrant, full of joy. She has a special energy that you feel when you're around her. She's creative, artistic, classy, laid back, knows her way around the city, is passionate about the community, and she recently graduated with her bachelor's degree in architecture. So I want to officially welcome you, Taylor, to my live stream, and I'm so happy that you're joining me.
Thank you so much, Sydney. That was an amazing introduction.
Thanks. All right, so we're going to sort of rewind to August of 2005 and just sort of paint a picture for our viewers as to what was going on with you and your family when prepping for the storm. How old were you? What was going through your mind? And things like that.
Yeah, so I remember it vividly. I was 8 years old. I had just started a new school here in New Orleans called Alice Hart. Um, and so every time a storm would hit the city, it was a little bit kind of like exciting because I knew I didn't have to go to school. And I was like, okay, I get to go see my cousins in Baton Rouge or whatever. Um, but at the same time, I knew that this storm was different, and we were supposed to stay. My mom wanted to stay because she didn't think it was going to be that bad. My dad had to stay because of his job. For our viewers, my dad worked for NOPD, New Orleans Police Department, and up until he became the police chief of New Orleans. So he stayed for Katrina, and we were going to stay. And then my grandma, who I lived with, she
Hmm.
was like, I want to go, I want to go, I want to go. And every day she kept begging my mom, to just let's leave. And so
Right.
my mom finally caved in, and we decided to leave. And then as soon as we had our bags packed, we were waiting on my uncle, Uncle B.
Hmm.
And everyone who knows me knows I have a very special relationship with my uncle, but he's pretty late to a lot of things, and that prolonged us leaving. And I just remember um, I'm going on a rant, but he would make like the bulletin for our church service, and we're supposed to have church service that Sunday. And so he was still making it, and then obviously we didn't end up having church, but that was just so interesting because we were like, a storm is coming, like no one's going to church.
Right.
So we finally left. We sat in traffic forever. I evacuated to Baton Rouge, where I eventually started going to school for about 3 months, and then we came back to New Orleans that November of 2005.
Wow. I think you actually and your family came back sooner than me and my family did because I was also 8 years old in the third grade. Like, I remember just being so young, but just remembering everything. There's like those moments in time where you might be like 2 years old and you remember like certain snippets of life. And for me, that was Hurricane Katrina. And so for me, we evacuated to Monroe, Louisiana. My dad has a family friend out there. And so we stayed with them for a week with his wife, him, and then his son Jared. And I just remember my sister was 2 years old at the time, my sister Madison. And like 2 years old, you hear the terrible twos and stuff like that, but like this was different. This was like terrible twos times 10. And like at the time, I was like, why is my sister like constantly crying and having tantrums? And I was like, this isn't just because of her age. Like she knows like something weird and like bad is going on. So
Yeah.
it just like escalated that situation. I'm like thinking back, like, man, my sister was really trying to just like live through the trauma and just like at that young, just living through those experiences. Texas. And so we, after staying a week in Monroe, which is about like 5 hours away from New Orleans, we went to Austin, Texas,
Oh,
and we
that's
stayed
nice.
there. Yeah, we have some family friends. My cousin Tiffany and my mom's side of the family, they stay over there. So we stayed in this tiny house. Well, first we stayed in this like apartment, and I remember me sharing a huge room with my sister. We never shared a room ever, especially her being at that age. I had to deal with, her tantrums at night and everything. But you know me, I'm a hard sleeper, so I rarely heard her cry at night.
Yeah.
And so after staying in that apartment complex, we transitioned into a rental home. And I think it was a 2 or 3 bedroom that my parents had rented out from this family that my cousin knew. And she set us up with everything. Like my family got jobs in Texas. I went to a school in Texas. And
Mm-hmm.
it was just like a whole new life that I had to adapt at 8 years old. And I was so looking forward to going to school in New Orleans because I was finally going to have my favorite third grade teacher. And I had her for about a week. And then Katrina came. So I was super upset by that. But we stayed there. I want to stay until January of the next year. So to see that your family moved to back in town in November was pretty interesting. So when did you return in November? So what was that like for you in terms of did any damage happen to your house or anything like that?
Yeah, it was interesting because we have a lot of family in Baton Rouge, and I think the general like consensus was that we weren't going to be able to go back to New Orleans because it was me, my mom, and my brother, but we were living with my dad's family.
Mm-hmm.
So my everyone expected my dad to just quit his job, move away. There was no more New Orleans, and I think in that moment was when he was really like, if anything, I'm staying here like to do my job. Like it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of it was like go time. Like
Yeah.
this is the time to like I don't know, for lack of a better word, this is time to act. And
Right.
there is no room like to leave. And I remember for a long time, like my mom was so stressed out because we're with my dad's family and they wanted to homeschool us like all together. They just had all these ideas for like what we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of conversations about that. But luckily, a couple months before Katrina, we moved from New Orleans East to the West Bank, and so our house only had a bit of wind damage
Yeah.
and just like a little minor damages here and there. So we were able to fix it up fairly relatively easily and get back into the house. Um, but my dad, that whole like 3 months, was running a police station out of our house with about like 20 cops. And I remember the first time we went back to the house just to grab more clothes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like seeing the city crossing the Crescent City connection. I remember seeing the army, the National Guard, just everywhere in their trucks. Like it literally looked like a war zone. I remember the smell of our
Mhm.
house. Like we have 20, people living in a house. It smells like people. And so
Right.
I remember that smell vividly, and I just remember that kind of transformation. Like the school that I started going to was the first school to open back up in my area,
Mm.
and that's how I started going to Catholic school. So that was like a major transition for me. Um, Everybody kind of grew up in that neighborhood and grew up going to that school.
Yeah.
So I think it was just a lot of transitions, but luckily I was so young that
Hmm.
it was very easy to adapt uh,
Right.
to what was going on, and I didn't have the full gist of what was happening. Um, so yeah, I remember hearing stories of like high school seniors who just wanted to finish out their senior year and they were living like in trailers by themselves, taking
Yeah.
care of them. So I think being the age that we knew enough and we
Hmm.
saw, you know, enough to understand what was going on, but I think it made it a little bit easier to transition.
Hmm. And speaking of transition, so you said you have family members who live in Baton Rouge. For those family members who lived in New Orleans before Katrina, did they come back to the city after Katrina, or did they relocate elsewhere?
Yeah, all of them relocated.
Mhm.
My immediate family, we were the only people to come back to New Orleans, and my uncle and parts of like my mom's side.
Mhm.
But it's like the families we were closest to relocated to Baton Rouge, Texas, Ohio. So
Yeah. For me, I think my mom's side of the family I'm really close to because like they're just like a huge family. My mom is the youngest of 8 kids. There's
mm.
5 girls and then 3 boys. One passed away before I was born, but
Hey,
the
either.
bulk of them. I'm sorry.
I said I didn't know that either.
Oh yeah, you learn something new every day. And we've been friends for so long. Um,
Right.
and so the bulk of my family from my mom's side lives in New Orleans East, and all of their houses kaput. Flood waters, like just the amount of family pictures that I'm sorry, getting emotional. Um and like photos to me are so important because like they show our history and just like we has used to have like so many family get-togethers before Katrina. And my mom was actually the one who was able to go some of our aunt's house and just like pick up those photos because something told her that something was going to happen to where they would be destroyed. And so she was able to grab some photos from my Aunt Angie and Auntie Jackie, my Auntie Yvette, because they all lost their house. And
Mhm.
so two of my aunts now live in Baton Rouge. One aunt lives in California. I have an uncle in Austin, Texas. And so we are just like spread out all over the place. And, because of COVID, I haven't seen them in such a long time. So that's like one of the big realities I think of Katrina is separation of families.
Mhm.
Um, so that's something that still hits me in my heart. And, it's just an ongoing battle. They come and visit the city sometimes, but it's just not the same. There's always that pre-Katrina comparison and post-Katrina comparison. So it's like, where is that disconnect? So
Mhm.
um, that's something to think about.
Yeah, and I think also like it's your families, it's your communities. Like I know a lot of people, just family friends who we were close with, who we went to church with, who we went to
Hmm.
school with, and I grew up seeing just around my neighborhood who they're all over the US now. And so it really did break up communities and
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. That
So my
I
next
always think
question.
of
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I always think of like pre Katrina and post Katrina kind of like AC, after Christ and after
Yeah.
the BC and AD.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually like a good comparison.
Hmm.
Um, my next question is looking back. So, okay, this is the question that I was trying to like just think in my head because I think we have a tendency to personify hurricanes. I mean, for starters, hurricanes have a human name associated with them most times. For us, it was Katrina. For Floridians and other communities, it was that hurricane. And so a typical New Orleanian will probably say Katrina versus Hurricane Katrina, like we're talking about somebody we know or someone we're familiar with. And looking back on it now, years later, who or what was Katrina to you?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Um, I think it was a defining moment. It was a marker in history when
Hmm.
everything just stopped, and it's very similar to what we're experiencing now with COVID. It was a pause just on life, and so everything in my mind, like we were just talking about, is you know pre Katrina, pre COVID, after COVID, after Katrina. And I think I'm sure the older you get, there will be multiple markers, but that was the first time that we had experienced anything like that. And I remember my parents and my grandparents talking about Hurricane Betsy.
Hmm.
That had its own identity, and just like even just hearing about that, I kind of had in my mind, who Betsy is, or like
Right.
how they personify Betsy. Um, so yeah, that's who Katrina is to me.
And what are some lessons or just some things you've taken away from Katrina looking back on it now?
I think a lot of what I saw during the aftermath of Katrina over this past 15 years has inspired my career choice, um,
Mm.
because I've really seen the city transform like before my eyes, and I've seen a strong sense of resilience and a strong sense of community. And so many people were just had given up on New Orleans, and seeing people actively rebuild the city like with tenacity and just knowing that this is our home, we're going to rebuild it, we're going to do what it takes to rebuild it, and we're going to study these things. There's so many, I've been a part of so many conversations about you know green infrastructure and just ways to mitigate water on a daily basis. And I think seeing the aftermath of Katrina is just so important to me, that we put an emphasis on our in our communities, and we put the faith and trust into our own communities rather than looking elsewhere for solutions. Because I think the strength is in the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, like Sydney said, I'm a community planner now. I focus a lot on the built environment and public places, um, and just infrastructure in general, and how that's either helping us or disenfranchising us, specifically within the Black community. So I think I was taught during the aftermath of Katrina that we have to be proactive instead
Mm-hmm.
of reactive, and just continue to value our space. And just in New Orleans, we have so much culture that's so vulnerable due to water, due to crime. There's so many factors that threaten our culture.
Gentrification.
hmm Gentrification for sure, for sure. And so I'm really happy just to focus on all of those factors that are that continues to threaten our city. And then I think seeing just people rebuild the city and bring back the culture and not letting it die down
Mm-hmm.
is very special. It's very important.
And so, with progress, there's always room for progress. And for those who are tourists or have visited the city, Mardi Gras or Essence Festival, you tend to see the good in the city. But there are parts in the city that are often overlooked and ignored, being places like New Orleans East, the Lower Ninth Ward. What needs to happen in those areas for them to progress and move on at the rate that the CBD is going by water? If you have
hmm
any ideas.
Yeah. So I think we can't rely on outside like entities to invest in those areas, because like the same way that they do in the Marini and the Bywater. Like I really think it's about taking it into our own hands. In the same way people um are doing with Lincoln Beach right now. Like you really see people saying, we're not going to wait on the city to give us permission to pick up trash. We've
Right,
been doing it
right.
all along. We've been the ones preserving this space. And technically, it's illegal to go pick up trash right now at Lincoln Beach. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I think not waiting on private investors or even the city to take matters accordingly. And especially, I think New Orleans East is a very interesting like case study, um, because I remember talking about them trying to like bring a second line to New Orleans East, and it's like
Yeah.
you can't see that, just like the way literally like the streets are set up, like it's
Right.
not dense. There's so many different factors that play into that, but I think just raising our voices as a community and really building community around these spaces needs to happen more. I just feel like those places are so often forgotten about. And until we start to make people look at
Hmm.
it, then we're not really going to see much.
Yeah. And that's what, I really think, like younger people than us, I think they really have good ideas in terms of how to do that with their activism and just like the artistry that I've seen from New Orleans. And they really have a voice that they can bring to the table and just draw attention to that area, which happens to be predominantly Black and has been for, throughout history. So,
And I think that's a part of who we are as Black people, is
hmm.
essentially like turning lemons into lemonade. And I
Right.
feel Like for example, the Claiborne overpass.
Hmm.
That wasn't meant like that completely disrupted our communities. And now we've adapted it so much so that it's like the peak destination of like
Right.
second line culture. You know, there's arts under the bridge. There's so much
Yep. New Orleans tailgates.
exactly. And so I do feel like we have the power to to see kind of a vibrant place um, in something right now that's kind of overlooked. And we have
Hmm.
the power to like change how it's perceived.
Hmm.
But I think it's going to take some time as well.
And so with your role, your current role at Lafitte Greenway, can you just briefly explain, for those who may not know what Lafitte Greenway is or Friends of Lafitte Greenway? And then I'll ask my next question.
So I'm the design and engagement coordinator for Friends of Lafitte Greenway through AmeriCorps Vista. And basically, I'm interested in just making the Greenway like a great public space. It's a walking path through the city of New Orleans. It runs a little bit over 2.5 miles. And there's arts along the Greenway. There's big public meadows where you can go out. I just came from a yoga class on the meadow. There's restaurants and like a lot of um, local restaurants along the Greenway. Um, and there's a lot of affordable housing, public housing in that area. And so my main focus is just progressing that space. We have a lot of native plants and bioswales to help mitigate floodwater. So a lot of what we do is like land stewardship
Hmm.
and just making sure that we're doing, you know, what we're saying we're going to do. And I think in the time of COVID, um, it definitely provides an area for people to just get out their houses, go ride a bike, you know, look at, be a part of nature. And so we've also been talking about healing as well, healing in our public spaces. And that's also something I'm super interested in right now, especially because we've been through a lot this year. And right now, you know, we're remembering Katrina, our neighbors in Lake Charles to the west have been, you know, impacted by Hurricane Laura. So I think there just needs to be a general like, or we've been talking about a lot of community healing in our
Hmm.
public spaces.
That's great. And the next question that I wanted to ask before we wrap up is, what if Hurricane Katrina didn't happen? Where do you think your life, how do you think your life would have played out if didn't have Katrina?
Hmm, that's a, wow. Um, so I think about this a little bit more. I do think it would be different. I probably wouldn't have started going to Catholic schools. Um, I don't know if my like dad would have ended up being the chief of police.
Right.
Because I think that time was really the time, at least for me, I saw his like passion for the city. And it was like, I'm going to be a part of making this change. And so I think for me, he kind of like planted that seed like in me and wanting to be a part of the progression of the city, the city's progression.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know if I would be as interested in like the transformation of the built environment and architecture or design in
Yeah.
general. Um, yeah.
Yeah. It's just crazy to think about. I was 8, and it's kind of a whirlwind to see, like, how much has happened since then. But I don't know. It's just a hard question to answer because there's so many what ifs we experience every day, and life is just full of surprises and blessings and the all in betweens. So I think overall, I am grateful for Katrina because, hmm, I am grateful because my mom has always taught me to be grateful for whatever comes our way, whether if it's a good thing, a bad thing, just like centering on gratitude is like you can see the blessings and the outpouring of one experience. And I think one of the blessings is that I do think that I would not have met you and my other best friends from high school if Katrina didn't happen. It's just been like a wave of things that I think about on a constant basis. Like, dang, if Katrina didn't happen, this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened. So it's just like I take this time to reflect on everything that I'm grateful for that has led me to this point. So,
Yeah, and one last thing. I was talking about this earlier this week, and I've been thinking about a lot of, like, after Katrina, there were a lot of eyes on the city of New Orleans. We saw a
mhm,
lot of just hands. Um, there was a lot of investment to bring the city back and a lot of projects, revitalization projects. And
right.
after like traveling to different places, I noticed that if it wouldn't have been for that investment,
Hmm.
or for Katrina to kind of like raise people's eyebrows, like, oh, we need to worry about our, irrigation and all these different things, where we be where we are right now, because
Right.
there's a lot of places in America that don't get that kind of investment ever, and it's like we shouldn't have to wait for a traumatic event to happen for
Hmm.
to 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 put that energy into our homes,
Right.
into our spaces. And so that's kind of that's been on my mind a lot lately. Um, yeah,
I mean, it's great to hear about the work that you're doing with the Greenway and just that space in general. I think is really good for the community, and it just invites everyone, no matter the color of their skin, just invites them to participate in something good overall for the community. So, thank you for that. And then, if you have any last words before we do wrap up statements and whatnot, you can do.
yeah. Who said unpresidential bananas? The last thing, I know a lot of people have different ways that they like to remember and commemorate Katrina. I just want to shout out Terrence Blanchard. His album, A Tale of God's Will, is a very beautiful album. It completely, like, just brings you back, like, to a time, into a place, and tells a complete story of before Katrina, during Katrina, after Katrina, the levees breaking. There's a song called Waiting, and it really is like an experience. He's very talented. I recommend everyone go listen to that album.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Taylor. And just want to wrap up with some closing statements. So, our thoughts and prayers go out to those impacted and affected by Hurricane Laura. I've been seeing reports saying that Lake Charles won't have power or water restored between 4 and 6 weeks. But one thing I've witnessed about the state of Louisiana is that when tragedy hits and strikes, we show up and show out for our neighbors. And when Katrina hit, there were people from New Orleans who evacuated to Lake Charles. And now that Hurricane Laura hit a few days ago, people from Lake Charles are going to New Orleans for, refuge and stuff like that. So we're resilient and we bounce back ready to conquer the next challenge. And also last night, I'm sure you guys have heard the news or seen the news on social media, but actor Chadwick Boseman tragically died last night due to colon cancer, and he was in Black Panther, The Five Bloods on Netflix, and so much more. And I think he was a real life superhero to so many of us, especially finding out how severe and aggressive his condition was, and he still managed to act and play these major and historical roles. So rest in peace and power to him, and we'll continue to shed love and light to all. 2020 has been a year. We got to keep pushing, trucking along. We got to remain humble and grateful for everything. There's something greater in store. I don't know what that looks like yet, but we'll wait and see. With that being said, thank you so much, Taylor, for joining me. It was so great hearing your experience and just overall just learning more about what your experience was during Katrina.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had so much fun doing
Yay! All right, have a